You do. At the same time, however, there is an extraordinary amount of information out there. And it seems to me, as somebody who gets paid to sit there and sift through information and read blogs and whatever all day long, there are certain people, you said you read Tech Review every day. There are certain things, and I'm not saying me as a reporter, for everybody, there are certain things that everybody individually, that they're things that they read each day, whether that's the Globe Sports page or whatever it is. There's a couple things that they feel they have to read each day. And those sources for those people, maybe a couple hundred things at this point. But because there's so many diverse sources right now, I think people do kind of narrow in a bit. So if you realize what your customers are reading each day, if you can figure that out, and particularly if it's a B2B sort of thing, and you can get into that, that's really important still to do. And that might not be the New York Times. That might be a B2B, trade public.
The important point, that's an important point you make, know your audience. The average age of a daily newspaper reader in the United States today is 57. How many of you have an audience, are trying to reach that audience? Probably not many. The average person who watches the evening news on the network TV is 63. Probably not an audience you want to reach. Now, there are audiences who are reading, audiences at different levels are consuming information through all kinds of different ways, as Dan says. But I think you have to start with understanding who are you trying to reach and what are the best ways to reach them. Getting in the Wall Street Journal may not really be the way to do it anymore. Getting on WSJ.com may be actually a much more effective way because it gives you SEO traffic that's going to drive visits to your website.
Well, one of the other issues with mainstream media we hear from VC clients a lot, or VC funded clients, is that, they cover certain certain companies, and Farhad Manju of Slate wrote recently, you may have seen this, why I won't stop writing about Apple and Google. And so if you look at some of the tech sections or business sections, it's all about Apple and Google. And so one of the questions would be, is...
Because it's what people are reading. Fortune, I've been at Fortune a couple of weeks, but every week we get, because we're related to CNN Money, we get a list of the 10 ticker symbols that have gotten the most traffic, essentially. Right. Via, and I don't mean ticker symbols like, what's their stock price, but every time I write a Google story and Google appears, suddenly that appears on CNN Money and Yahoo Finance or whatever, Google and Apple are 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2 every single week. No doubt about it. And which is why Fortune Tech has 3 sections. Fortune Tech, Apple, Google.
And yet there are companies out there that aren't Google and Apple. So what can those the non-Apple and Google companies do to get their word out there?
It's got to be a really interesting, compelling story. I mean, we try really hard, I think all of us do, to not just chase the traffic stats, because we could just put up the latest, every turn of the screw from Apple, Google, Steve Ballmer sneezes, and put up some racy pictures and get tons of traffic. But so fortunately, X economy doesn't have a business model that depends just on eyeballs and traffic, so that's good. But as journalists, we're looking for the unique story that no one else has. So if it's an interesting company that's competing against one of those giants, say, and they have some disruptive way of maybe not looking like they're a competitor, but actually they are, or they're kind of working up their way up market from starting somewhere that's
or an obvious complement to one of them.
Yeah, exactly. Or we're partnering with them, or how do you build people a while ago were saying
win them as a customer.
Yeah.
Win them as a customer and call me. Right? I mean, that's one story. People complain a lot about how companies that don't get venture backing don't get enough press. It's true. We have these blinders on. We look at companies that get venture backing. One of the reasons is everybody at this table writes about private companies. It's difficult. We don't get quarterly reports. We don't get numbers. We don't get press releases out of you guys. So what do? Well, we look at what we can. We need to get data. Here's some data. Somebody put in $1.5 million. That's data. So we're going to write about that. Well, another thing that's data is when you win Cisco as a customer. That's huge, right? Well, you should be telling that story. If you win a customer that's big, it's a validation point for an early stage startup. All of a sudden you go from, hey, I'm the next guy with the next big idea to, hey, I'm the guy who won Cisco as a customer. And that, to me, it's not a matter of winning my attention. It's a matter of that's what the readers that I'm writing for are going to get, that's what people are going to pay attention to. Whether you're writing it on your own blog or whether you're telling me or whether you're telling Dan, telling Greg, telling Paul, that's what people are going to pay attention to. And, that's the story you should be telling.
I'll tell you a story. It was about 10 years ago. It was the last job I worked where I was a staff journalist. There was a CEO who came around to visit us. He had a small company, a startup company called Right Now Technologies. And he came around to visit me, and I was working for an internet startup at that point no one had ever heard of. And he said, and he sat down with me for an hour, and we talked for an hour, and he said, I'm gonna come visit you once a year, and I'm gonna call you 4 times a year. And I pledged to do that. And he did that. And for the next 4 years, he came by once a year and he called every quarter. And that company became Write Down Technologies, which is a publicly held company, very successful CRM software provider today. Point of that is do something remarkable. You know, if you ever read Seth Godin's book, Purple Cow, that book is all about doing remarkable things. Can you do something remarkable that is going to make people remember you? It wasn't just me. He was going to a bunch of other journalists and doing the same thing. Big commitment of his time. But he did something remarkable that made his name, his company, stick in the names of the people he was trying to reach. And it was a great strategy.
We're going to open this up to questions in a few moments. I do want to ask if you think, you know, you're all putting out information in different places, not only on articles, but blogs and Twitter and all that. Do you think that that the companies pitching you or the PR agencies are doing a good job in terms of tracking what you're interested in or what you're doing and picking up the signals?
What percentage of them are doing a
Yeah.
good job? Because some of them are doing a good job.
And do you expect them to be able to
20%?
read through everything that you posted recently?
I actually think let me rephrase. You say 20%. I think of the
I
no.
actually
It's,
reacted what you started to say 20%.
well, I was going to say. I mean, it's weird. There's two different questions. Is it the number of press releases I'm getting? Yeah, that's probably 20% I'm interested in. But of the PR people who I actually know, or at least clearly know me, you know,
Right.
once you get on a list, you sometimes get on a list from people who just don't. I mean, it's beyond random. Oh, look, this company released a wine in Napa Valley. I don't write about wine. But for the ones who actually know me, I'd say it's probably much higher, probably 80%. Doesn't mean I'm necessarily
Yeah.
going to write a story. I can't write, I get, 30, 40 pitches a day. I obviously can't write that many posts. But are they relevant to me? Yeah, I'd say most of them from those people are. The vast, vast majority, I think
Yeah.
they are. The better question, though, is a couple things. One, did they get it to me in time? In other words, is it, we just put a press release out over the wires, would you like to speak to our CEO in 8 hours? No, I don't. I mean, look, for us, not just breaking the news, but writing about it in a timely fashion matters. And then the second thing, we talked about this a bit in the pre-call, is if you're going to put that, this is just a general thing, if you're going to put out news and you're going to ask a reporter to write about you, and particularly if you're a PR person, don't have the following conversation, which is, would you like to write about our company? They do so-and-so, so-and-so. Yeah, I'd love to. Can I talk to the CEO? He's on vacation today. He's not available today. Then send out the press release or call me. Don't do the news. That happens in a remarkable amount of time. That the person who the news is about can't talk to the reporter that day for whatever reason. It's mind-numbingly stupid, but it happens a lot. That was an aside. Crazy. Happened today.
Okay, I think we'll open up to questions.
Yeah, just a quick one on that point. So is it more effective to have a PR agency, let's say small startup company trying to get some news out? Is it more effective to have a PR agency try to link you up with a reporter, or do you guys rather get something right from the entrepreneurs, something direct or a phone call
The
from
latter.
the guy who's living?
100%, the latter.
Yeah.
Yeah, have the entrepreneur call me. Yeah, don't, I mean, I don't mean to denigrate PR people and say they're not valuable, because some of them are, especially the ones I have relationships with, like Dan was saying, people I know. But 9 times out of 10, especially if someone I don't know, I'd much rather hear from the entrepreneur who's saying, hey, we've got this, even if you can't spell, even if you can't spell entrepreneur, Ron Conway can't spell entrepreneur.
That's true.
Okay. And I'll repeat the questions, so it's on the.
Well, I am a PR person, so, I do have a question for you, and it's what I run into a lot with smaller companies. A lot of times, it's gonna take a little while for them to pull that story together, they deal with Cisco or that tested with big companies. So what I like to do is I like to work with them to get to know you ahead of time, so when that news does break, I'm not the one calling you that morning and saying, or 2 days before, can you write about the story, you have to catch up. I know that staffs are shorter, I know that people are working under tighter deadlines. How open are you to meeting with companies just to hear what they're saying, what the story, what do they think they're doing, why do they think that this is a good, a good product or a good marketplace, but without that immediate hook that will allow you to write something right away.
If I can just summarize that so we can have that. how often do you meet with executives, just to, on an informational perspective?
For me, I don't do it with startups really. I mean, I'm covering more the money side of things. You know, if it's a VC or a private equity guy or a hedge fund manager, yeah, I'll probably do that. Not because I expect to get their story out later, but because I'm hoping to create, you know, to cultivate them as a source. I will say though, that I think what Galen just said for that last question applies here as well. I would be much more likely to take that meeting, even if you're the one who's kind of holding their mouth as the puppet behind them. I'm going to be much more likely if they're the ones who call me or get in touch with me rather than you saying, would you like to meet with Jim? He's doing whatever.
For me, it wouldn't matter as much whether I hear from you or whether I hear from the CEO necessarily. In theory, I'd love to meet with way more people than I could, obviously. I think the daily realities is that we're hoping to get some kind of a story out of every meeting, whether it's a lead onto something else, which isn't even your company, which often happens.
Right.
So sometimes a phone call, a quick, 15 to 20-minute phone call can be enough to establish a connection. But I think we're in the business of relationships more than, I think that's the most important part of what we're doing actually, to get the best stories, both from our end and from your end. So the more personal connections that we can make that are strong and relevant, the better.
And maybe that's some advice to give to that person, that if they get the meeting with Greg or with me or whoever, and they have the phone call that was face to face, you know, say to them, you know, don't make the meeting completely about you and completely about your product. Get that message out there. But you know what? If you heard, you know, some market gossip about some other company, mention that. You know, no. I mean, because really, as I said, it's really about, from us, at least for me, it's about cultivating the person as a source. And if I believe that that's somebody who my conversations are fruitful, even if it's not about their company, they don't have an announcement yet, but I think that talking to them is going to mean I can produce something, I'm much more likely to want to talk to them again and again, and when they have news, I'm more likely to write it.
I think one thing you're hearing from the panel here is you need to think about the interests of the journalist and how you as the PR person can best serve those interests. We've heard everyone pretty much say, I want to hear directly from the CEO, but in many cases the CEO is not the person you want calling the journalist. They're not good communicators. They don't speak succinctly. They don't speak at a level that the journalist can relate to. And the role of the PR person is often to tell the story. It's to take the CEO who may be quirky or a little phlegmatic and turn that story into something that you know the journalist can understand and can consume in the 2 minutes that you have to spend with them. That's still a very vital role.
Now, is there a way, as a follow-up to that, a way to establish relationships just using social media with you? You know,
Absolutely. I think, if you're thinking about putting out a press release, instead of doing that, think about writing a comment on one of my stories. It gets my attention. It gets my attention immediately because, frankly, people never comment on my story. No, I mean, I'm serious. And
Finally,
I
someone
mean,
who says it.
even if you get 15 comments on every story, it still gets your attention. Every journalist reads the comments on their stories, right? I don't read the press releases. I read the comments on their stories.
That's great advice.
You know, so I mean, that's one. That's not new. That's not Twitter. It's not Facebook. But it's kind of old school now, right? Comments on blogs. Whoa. But that's definitely an effective way to get someone's attention.
And they show up in search engine optimization too.
That's right. That's right. I mean, don't spam me. Don't get out there. Oh, my company does this. Check it out. But if you've got something relevant and intelligent to say, that's huge.
So for most of the companies, the smaller companies that are here, I think the fundamental challenge in getting through to panelists here is you've got this long list of press releases or pitches that come into your inboxes every day, or RSS readers, et cetera. Galen, you said, it's not a scoop if I get it a half an hour early. So when if you're a small company, when do we get it to each of you? Is it a day ahead of time? Is it, half a day? Is it 8 hours or whatever? And will you honor embargo? Because, we know a lot of media outlets have said, forget about it. When I get it, I'm going with it. So, interested in your thoughts on that.
Embargoes are very tricky these days
Yeah,
because
I'm
they
glad this came up.
get broken in
Yeah.
many ways, and so. But yes, in principle, I don't have any policy about not taking embargoes. But I will ask if it is embargoed, who else is getting it, or what kinds of other outlets and what is unique that you can give to us. And if it's not compelling enough, then we might just do something short on it or not do it at all. And timing-wise, probably a day ahead is nice.
Just